All right, good morning, everyone. We're really excited to have with us this morning Liz Flores. She is a Chicago-based painter and muralist whose contemporary work focuses on the human condition and female form. She's going to discuss for us her leap from corporate America into the art world, the choices she's made that's contributed to her success, and how, as a self-taught artist, she has learned to execute large-scale mural pieces or projects. So she shared her story before, and we're happy to have her share it here with us today. And a lot of her work has been, can be seen around the greater Chicagoland area. She's collaborated with major brands like Lululemon and Target. She has been exhibited in galleries throughout the US and Canada and is driven by her interests in community, Latinidad, womanhood, and self-reflection. And more recently, designed a t-shirt for the Chicago White Sox that Moraine Valley had the privilege of sponsoring. And we have a couple of these shirts here today, so if you're interested in one of them, please ask Liz a question. You could take one home. All right, thank you so much, Liz. Welcome to Moraine Valley.
Okay. Oh, there it goes. Hi. Thank you guys so much for having me. A little bit nervous, but I hope this can be a little bit more of a dialogue. And we can kind of talk about the journey from, wanting to be an artist and getting to the point of doing it full time as a job. So I guess just a little bit about me, which I know we already did kind of an introduction, but I am a self-taught artist focusing on just contemporary and abstract work. And a lot of my art is focused on abstracting like the female body and focusing on identity and personal stories. And I guess when people ask like, well, how do you get, from here to here? This is, I think, what really it feels like to be an artist. It's just nothing is linear, and I feel like it requires so much flexibility. So I attended Illinois State University, yes, go Redbirds, and so I studied business. I studied small business management and entrepreneurship. I always loved art, and I really wanted to study art at ISU, but I think like most parents, they were a little bit concerned about the financial viability of that. And so, so I just chose a different path. This was also pre-Instagram and social media where you can really, interact with artists, living artists. I studied business. I kind of did art just on the side for my own personal enjoyment, but I didn't really think about it as a career until I had graduated. And I graduated, went into corporate America, and I was there for 3 years. And it was just during that time that I was like, I don't think I can be in this, in the corporate structure. And then I realized, well, I just spent 4 years in college thinking I was going to be in the corporate structure. And so I started to really get into my art practice. I would, after work, I would come home, focus on paintings, focus on anything. At this point, I didn't even know what kind of art I wanted to make, and so you're really starting from like square zero, not even a square one. And so I just started making a lot of work, and that led to eventually leaving my job, working many other kind of little odd jobs, but consistently working on my art for years until really 2019 was when I was really like, I do not need to do anything else. My art is fully sustainable. But that was, like I said, it was such a winding road. And I think for when people ask, well, what kind of pushed it over the edge, I would say that there was, one sort of instance that I think was like a snowball, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but there were so many little steps that you needed to take to get to that kind of big snowball effect, or, when people are like, oh, like that's the event that kind of launched the career. But before that, it was honestly working on your art consistently. And this is So I think I had this in my head when I was doing my artwork in the beginning. It's just not really that good in the beginning. And I think you just have to trust. Ira Glass talks a lot about your taste and your talent. And so the talent may not necessarily be exactly where you want it to be, but you're trying to match like your taste and your talent basically. And so I think for the first couple of years of doing art, whether that's here at school or afterwards, that's the kind of goal. And so I kept this kind of in mind, was that my job, it's funny, I had graduated, but my job was to be a student again for the next few years, and to just work on figuring out what kind of artist and what kind of art I wanted to do. And so I did a lot of different work. This is from like right after I graduated, which I was like, oh, sometimes you look back at your old work, you're like, I don't know if you want to, you always want to share like the most current stuff. But I think it's important to look back because I was doing all different kinds of things. Like a lot of this, you wouldn't even kind of, I guess, see it necessarily in my work now. But I was working with oils, I was working with acrylics. I was like, let me paint on paper, canvas, let me do oil pastel, because I need to figure out like who I want to be as an artist and what is my style. And it took a couple years, but eventually, I started to get more into abstraction. I started to get more into like the figurative aspect. I learned that that's kind of what I was drawn to, and I was starting to reach out to other artists on social media that were kind of in that same realm, to start to build a network of artists. Because I think because I didn't study art in school, I also graduated with a lot of people like in the business world, but I didn't really have a group or like a collection of artists that were my colleagues yet. And so that was super important for me as well. And it led to just the style that I've now kind of honed in on and developed. And this is kind of what my artwork looks like now. So I want to get into the sort of process of like, so how do you do a large scale mural, and all that kind of stuff. But before I kind of get into the more technical aspects of things, I wanted to talk a little bit about like the idea of like art as a career versus art as a calling, because I think, of course, everyone wants, like, if you're studying art, you want your art to be your career, and that is like always the hope. And I think when people, in the beginning, when I was first doing my artwork, and of course, like, people are not buying your paintings, or you're showing your artwork in a gallery or in like in some kind of setting, and it's like, okay, well, it didn't sell. I feel like those first years are the most difficult, and I feel like that's where a lot of people decide to, maybe quit, or this just isn't going to be what I'm going to be able to do, and it can feel super disappointing. And I think the reason I got to where I am now, to be able to call this my career and do it full time, is that I did not give up during those like disappointments. And the reason I was able to not give up during those disappointments is because I always looked at art as a calling rather than like a career first. The career was always my hope, and it was always what I was going to work towards. But I knew that I was going to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that I continued to work on my art no matter what. And I think looking at art in that way, that's what can help you sort of navigate those disappointing moments. And even to this day, as a full-time artist, I still remember this. Every time I have a show, or every time I put like a new, I work with a brand or anything like that, because you just really never know what's going to happen. And so I think art is like that. Art is not a career where it's necessarily consistent all the time. And I think navigating those inconsistencies, it's helpful to look at it like, well, this is my calling, and my job is to foster that and do whatever I need to do to make sure that I continue to, make the artwork that I want to make. So, yeah, I think that there's like the technical business aspect of art, which I like talking about, but then there's also the sort of emotional part that I think you have to think about if you're going to be doing, jumping into art as a full-time job. So, okay, going into maybe the more business aspects of art or how things are maybe structured for me personally. So my sort of brand as an artist, or my idea as an artist, is so I do art shows. I have commissions. These are private commissions that people, reach out to me with, like, maybe a specific size, or maybe they have a specific palette in mind. And then murals and collaborations. So these are the three sort of segments of how my art business is set up. These are like the three different revenue streams, if you will. And so how do you find the opportunities? This is like, I think this is what people really want to know. So, okay, so like, how do I like work with like Lululemon, or how do I work with Sephora? Because that's what I want to do. So this was my first mural job, and this is, I think, if you're going to ask me what was the sort of one event that maybe helped snowball your career and helped push it to be something that you could do full time, this was the one. So this is, you see that iPad right there. So this was a mural I did for Sephora, and the iPad is what the drawing that I did. Basically, I took an image of the wall and drew on the image, and then that's what I sent to them as my sketch, or my mock-up. And then they looked at it, approved it, and then it was like, okay, like, this is, please arrive on this day and start painting. And I was like, okay. I was like, I don't even have a ladder. So, and the way that this happened is another artist actually recommended me for this job. And that's actually how most of these bigger projects like Lululemon, Target, that's how a lot of those projects have come to be, is other artists recommending you or putting your name in the hat for a bigger project. A lot of projects, it's it's not really something like, oh, I'm going to apply to it. And so I think a big piece of advice is, I hate the word networking because it sounds so, I guess, I don't know, so like, okay, networking, but when I think about the artist that gave me that, or that like put me up for this job, I met her like 3 years prior because I had reached out to her, very cold email. Hey, I really love your work. I really want to be a full-time artist. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? She said yes. Years later, she lives in San Francisco. I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a trip to San Francisco to try and meet this artist again, and to just keep that kind of conversation, that relationship going. You kind of take a leap because you're like, well, I don't know, like, they might be busy, or, and I sort of had a list of artists in San Francisco that I wanted to do like a studio visit with. And so went to San Francisco, had the studio visit, again, the relationship kind of continues, and you're learning and you're growing your sort of like, network of colleagues. And then all of a sudden, the person is like, hey, guess what? Like, Sephora talked to me about this mural, but I think you'd be better for it. I put your name in the hat. And it's like, wait, what? And that, like, I feel like, you don't think about the little sort of like stepping stones. You kind of think, oh, okay, well, this one job is kind of what catapulted it. But it wasn't necessarily just this. It was the 3 years prior of like, I'm going to send the cold email. I'm going to try to make this, this studio visit happen. I'm going to put myself out there, even though this person doesn't know me, even though, they might be just too busy, a whole bunch of things. I'm going to buy the plane ticket to go and meet this person in their studio, and all of those things. It's a lot of building blocks, and I think that is what's important, because you might not see, anything come of it, anything come of these relationships necessarily right away. And for me, I was like, I'm just learning, so I'm just, this is like me meeting like a teacher or something. So I'm just gonna, do it, and whatever happens, happens. And when I first quit, well, this is prior to quitting my job, but I set up a ton of studio visits with artists all over Chicago. I flew a lot to New York. I was in that mode of education. Like, I need to educate myself. I need to learn from the people that are doing, living this life that I want to live. And it's very, it was obviously very intimidating. Obviously, lots of people are, they say no. But for every no, you do get a yes email, and you get people that are like, okay. And then, yeah, and you tell them. And I would tell them, I want to do murals. I made it very clear always what I really wanted. I said, I want to do a mural. And so, if you come across an opportunity, it'd be great if you could just keep me in mind. I also assisted a lot of artists throughout this whole time. So I said, are you doing a mural? Because how do you learn how to do a mural? Honestly, you just have to, you have to assist, and you just have to do it. You can prep as much as you possibly can. But the way that I really learned was being an assistant for another artist, and just volunteering my time. And so, yeah, that art is so much about, it's so much about your, I guess, the community that you are building around you, and how you support that community, and then how that support kind of comes back to you, and how you make it very known, hey, I'm here for real. I'm here to really do my art practice, and this is what I want to do. I want to work with these bigger brands, and yeah, and so very, very, very fortunate, and that was my first mural. And I remember I was still doing a part-time job at this. I remember I had to work on prior to the store opening, so I'd wake up at 4 a.m. at the store, work. I think the store opened around 10, and so I had to have everything cleaned up and moved by 10, and then I would hop on my computer at this was at Water Tower Place, to find a quiet place to hop on my computer for the part-time job I was doing. And yeah, and I did that. And also, this is I think 11 feet tall. And again, this was the first mural I ever did. I actually bought this ladder off of Amazon. It's this collapsible ladder. I was terrified. My knees were shaking at this point. And it's kind of funny because when you see how far you've come, because now I guess 11 feet, you're just kind of okay, 11 feet. But at the time, this was I was oh my God, I feel like such a noob. Anyways, it's just kind of interesting to look back on that. Okay, so a little bit more about the process and large-scale mural work. So everything I do starts with a sketch. I do a lot of the work digitally, but I always start with a pencil sketch. And whether it's a sketchbook, sometimes if I'm feeling very nervous about a project, maybe it's just a big brand that's got me a little bit, I will just get computer paper and sketch on computer paper. For some reason, it just feels a little bit less daunting. And so, yeah, so I do a pencil sketch for everything. I start there, and then I bring everything into an iPad, and I work on Procreate. And so that's the app that I have been using for years now to do all the work digitally. And I also use Illustrator at times too. And so I sketch I basically do another pencil sketch, but with paint on the wall that I'm working on. So how do you transfer the pencil sketch that's on paper to this? A couple of different ways. The way that I usually do it is with some kind of projector, a very large scale projector. So setting it up, very far away, projecting it on the wall late at night, and tracing it on there. Sometimes that doesn't always work out, and because you might not be able to stand back far enough, you just might not be able to be there at night. There's a lot of things that kind of can go awry with using a projector for your artwork. So there is also the doodle method, and also doing a grid system, which when you're working with brick, doing a grid system can be easier. And also just freehand. Sometimes I might be able to project like maybe parts of the mural, and then everything else, you know, you just kind of freehand. But yeah, but I think that's kind of like the most difficult part. And then after that, you're just kind of, it's more of just kind of like a sort of meditative practice, where you already have your sketch, you're following the colors, right, that you've chosen. Yeah, and then so there you go. Anything that's over 12 feet I usually use like a lift or something like that. And again, I was able to use a projector on this. I wish I would have like taken photos or something, but because it was funny, the projector was all the way across the street, and I had two friends kind of sitting with the projector, because I was like, okay, it's like 10 o'clock, 11 p.m. And we're out here, and then this was a laundromat, and so I was able to use the electricity in the laundromat by many extension cords, and it was just like a whole thing of extension cords across the street. And yeah, but I feel like, again, doing art full time requires so much flexibility. Doing mural work absolutely requires flexibility and so much problem solving. You never know what the sort of situation is going to be the day that you're coming to paint. Sometimes there's no electricity. Sometimes the lady at the laundromat kept unplugging the electricity, so it just like, phew, and you're like, oh no. And so it's just kind of, it's one of those things where you are an expert problem solver when you're doing mural work. It's also, when you're doing it outside, the weather can be it's nothing that you can control, but that's another thing that requires a lot of problem solving. How are you going to keep the paint from getting too hot, from overheating, just kind of melting? And yeah, so I've seen a lot of like my friends kind of built these like little makeshift kind of like tents or tarps to just kind of keep everything a little bit cooler. But yeah, it's it's kind of, yeah, once you kind of get past the sketch phase, everything else kind of falls into place. And then, so this is a digital piece. And so sometimes the mural is a digital mural, which means, I'm sending an Illustrator file, and instead of me painting it, they're going to print it and then and install it, which is what we did for Target, and also what I recently did for a Lululemon store downtown. And yeah, and it's like, it doesn't actually require too many tools. My iPad is my best friend, pencil and paper, and the people at Home Depot know me very well, because that's where I get all my paint for the mural work. And yeah, and so just kind of last minute thing is, when I first started doing artwork and I was thinking about doing it full time, I really had a very narrow definition of what art was. And I really just thought, well, paintings and galleries, that's like what I'm going to be doing. And only after I really started to dive into it, I started to meet other artists, started to see what other projects people were working on, did I realize that art can be so many different things. It could be something on a t-shirt. It can be, like I said, something digital that, somebody is printing. Something like, we did these like patches for the bulls, which I was like, I never would have thought about that. I never would have thought about that. And so many of these projects that I've done where you're painting on things that you just would have never really thought, like, oh, I'm going to paint on a barrel, I feel like that has really expanded my thought process and definition of like what art can be, the kinds of projects that you're going to take on. And it has felt, and it's been really, really cool. It just feels like there really are no limits to what it is. And I think working in all of these different mediums has also shown me how art can be made much more accessible to a lot of people. It's not just, you have to come to this gallery necessarily, or you have to, have this painting. And yeah, so I hope that, yes, I hope this was educational, and I hope it also kind of expands, your thought process on art and kind of what it takes, and just the different decisions, and it's really all about consistency, and that's what I tell everyone. It's just these little consistent moments that build up to these larger moments that sort of start to kind of catapult you forward. But yeah, thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
So, Liz,
Yes.
you did a great job talking about essentially your journey from getting to the point of, okay, I quit my corporate job. I'm working a bunch of different odd jobs. Now it's time to invest in my art.
Yeah.
Right? And invest in myself. But one thing I'm wondering is, like, I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Like, I look at your art. Tell me about, like, some of your artistic influences. Like, there's got to be Picasso and Gauguin. And
Yes.
where does that come from, and how important is it that, like, you are essentially, like, reinterpreting it or bringing it to, like, a contemporary point?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So, and I'll just repeat it but the question was, like, what are my artistic influences and bringing maybe those masters and making it contemporary to now and my work and my style. Definitely, yes, Picasso, Matisse. The one thing I'll say is, coming from not having a art background, and from, I'm just I'm in my parents' basement now. I'm just got back from my job, and now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start my painting now. I felt like I didn't have a lot of that art background initially, so I was just like, well, I went to the art museum and I saw this, and so that looks, I kind of like that abstract work and things like that. So I didn't have that, I guess, background right away. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking a lot about the kind of old masters and stuff like that. Not until later, when you actually are, trying to kind of educate yourself on art history. But I was actually influenced a lot by more contemporary painters that I was finding online, who are alive today, and a lot of female artists. So Luna, Heather Day, Nadia Waheed, those were the artists that I was looking at, and I think it was only later that I started to kind of look at, I guess, people just like I said, those kind of old masters, but those were sort of the people that were more front and center for me, and I think, yeah, you can definitely see the influence, and I think, for me, I think it's okay, the way that I'm going to make it contemporary for me, or relevant to me, is what is the story that I'm trying to tell? Because they were telling their own stories. They were talking about the things that were going on at that time. So what is it that I'm trying to say with the work? And in terms of with color and the question is always why. I think with my artwork and the shape, the color, I always want everything to have a purpose to it. And okay, is this blue here? Is it serving to be kind of like a punctuation mark, a punctuation mark that we use in a sentence? And what is it? Yeah, and what is all of that trying to say? And then and what am I trying to say? Me, Liz, living now. And so, yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but I think just like I said, kind of trying to stick to what is my story, and what am I trying to do. I think looking at the past is I think it's very cool to see technically how are they doing this and how are they interpreting certain events and things like that, and then taking that to today and your own story, and then figuring out how to make that your own.
Right. No, that answers it. I think also when you look at, say, a out. He was the first one
Mhm.
to do it. So I think that, like you talking about like some of your contemporary influences, um, many of those benefited, I guess, from that sort of incomplete, earlier style. And
Mhm.
in many ways, I mean, the sophistication of your color aesthetic, the shapes, the abstracted forms. I mean, they are so much more crisp and precise, and there's a lot more harmony, I think, in your compositions than Matisse is, right?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, I think it's fantastic, and like one of the things that I wanted my students to be here for is because I mean the idea that you're self-taught, like even though I teach art at a college, right? Um, I do find that like there are uh, many elements of my self-taught artist, that existed
Mhm.
a very long time ago now, that I miss and I wish I had. And there's always this kind of balance between, okay, now you're a full-time artist, now you're influential, you're talking at colleges and all of that. Um, you know, are you ever afraid that you're going to lose that raw element that you had
Mhm.
for the ultra crisp aesthetic that might be called for?
Yes. Okay. Am I ever afraid I'm going to lose the sort of raw element of like what comes with being self-taught?
Yeah, yeah. Because like when you think of like corporate art, right? You think that you have to play it safe, maybe, or you
Yes.
have to, yeah,
Yeah, and there's
great,
more people influencing it as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yes. So, and I think that's why the way that I've sort of thought about art as an art practice and then art as an art business is, I have my studio practice, which is I get to call all the shots. Like the paintings are, no one is sort of dictating maybe the color palette or saying, well, we really want like maybe this brand color, or something like that. And then versus if you're doing something for a store, they will, they do want to have input on the color palette and they do want to see sketches beforehand and things like that. And so I think it's a balance between the two. It's a balance between how do I keep, the studio practice. I get to, explore kind of any themes that I want. I get to kind of go wherever I want. Um, and the more, I guess, the artwork that is more commercial. Um, and how can the two of those kind of play together well and support each other as well? And I think that's too what, as an artist, you have to decide. Well, do I want to be a studio artist? Do I want to be a commercial artist? Do I want to do both? If I do both, what is sort of how am I splitting my time up between the two? So for me personally, I love studio work. I love being in my studio and painting. I do really love the commercial projects. I think a lot of the commercial projects, I think sometimes I've been maybe shy about using a certain color or shy about trying something new. And maybe the creative director that I'm working with at the company says, why don't we try adding this? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. You try it and you're like, oh my God, I actually love that. I was like, I'm going to use that in my next painting. So I think it's a little bit of like a balance. I will say that just not having, yeah, I think you're right. You don't want to lose sort of the rawness, and you don't want to lose the reason why you got into this job in the first place, which is I have artwork that I really want to make. I have stories and things I want to say with the artwork, and and that's why I wanted to leave corporate, was because I wanted to do my own thing. And so yeah, it's tricky, and it's definitely a balancing act. It's something I talk about with my art friends all the time, like all of us that are kind of in this kind of dance between the commercial work, our studio practice, and where we want things to go. And yeah, it's just kind of like a constant ebb and flow. And I think too that that's something important if you are choosing art as a career path and as something you want to do full time. Is that's something that you need to kind of reckon with, is your relationship to your art can change like once you kind of go down, that path, and you're like, okay, my art is now in charge of paying my bills, So that's, I think that's something to just keep in mind, and it's something to just, to just always remember, like, okay, I left corporate because I wanted to do this, and like kind of always remembering, like, this is why I'm here. Like, I'm here to make the art that I want to make. And there have been many times on corporate projects where it's like, no, it's kind of going too far. It's leaving sort of my realm of like what I want it to be and what I want it to look like. And so I think having those like boundaries in terms of like, okay, how far do I want to change the artwork or the palette or things like that? I think that's important, but it's something too that like until you're in it and until you're making those decisions, you're just not really sure, I guess, where the kind of line is for you, and the line is different for everybody. But yes.
How do you feel, or do you at all feel that your business background has been helpful in your art career? I know a lot of artists are like, I love art and I want to make this my job, but I don't know anything about running a small business.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of being a full-time artist is being a small business. So how do you feel that your background has helped you in any way, or?
Yeah. That's a good question too. So how do I feel my business background, that fact that I studied business, how has that helped, or has it helped my career as an artist? I definitely think it helped, especially because, like I said in the beginning, I didn't have any really like art colleagues. Everybody was either starting a business or they were in corporate. And so when I was like, I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to like leave my job and I want to do art. My friends, like people around me were like, okay, what's the strategy? Like and I think that those are really good questions. Like, those were fair questions. And I had that already in my mind, and I think being an artist, like it can be like such like a kind of romantic endeavor. But in my mind, I always did have the idea that like, okay, but I also need to like pay the rent for my studio. And so how am I going to do that? Is it going to be part-time work? Is it going to be the artwork? And if it is going to be the artwork, then that means, I need a marketing strategy. I need to, figure out sales. That means I need to become a salesperson. I need to be networking. I need to be going to art shows, even though I don't know anyone there. And I need to be doing all these things. And so I think it was very helpful because I think it kind of helped bring me down to earth a little bit. And I think it just kind of gave me sort of that rational side that I needed in order to, say, okay, this is how much money I need to make per month. And that means I need to sell this, XYZ, or I need to, figure this out. And so yes, it was very helpful. Yes.
Knowing how important social media is for brand identity and like exposure, like do you have a strategy for like how you put your work out, or like
Mm-hmm.
put your content and connect with people that way?
So in the beginning with Instagram was my main kind of thing, which I think is true for a lot of artists. And so I was just putting our paintings out on Instagram. I mean, in the beginning it was like just my friends. So it was like, okay, 20 people like your photo. And then I started to get a little bit more serious about it. You start researching what are the hashtags and what are, this and that. I think it's hard for me to talk about the marketing social media strategy because social media is so different now than when I started. And so in the beginning, you could, things were chronological. You could do put hashtags like, acrylic painting, contemporary painting, Chicago artists, all that kind of stuff, and that kind of would catapult you further. But it's definitely different now. I feel like those strategies don't necessarily work with the way Instagram is now, and now we have TikTok, and so but social media was and still is. I mean, it's crucial to my business. It's crucial to just sharing like the artwork. The one thing that I do tell people is that whether you're going to do TikTok, Instagram, both, any of the other social platforms, you don't own those social platforms. So although, yes, I have an Instagram account and a page, and I have, all these thousands of people following me, I don't, kind of own all that. Like I don't own Instagram. Instagram is its own company. And so, the ability to reach like 12,000 plus people, I am not, it's not like I post something and it goes to all of them. And the way that social media program is right now, it really doesn't hardly anybody. And so I think if you're going to do social media, you definitely need to do that. But I think you need to think about how can you get those people on social media into some kind of it could be it sounds simple, but like some kind of email list thing, something that you own, because you own the ability to contact all those people. Instagram is filtering or, with their algorithm, who is going to see that and how many people are going to see that, even though those people have sort of subscribed to you or followed you. And so, so I think over the past few years, I remember someone mentioned that. They were like, okay, cool, you have an Instagram account, but you don't own any of that stuff. And Instagram could decide, we're gonna shut everything down tomorrow. What would you do? I'm like, oh wow, I wouldn't be able to reach any of these people that are interested in my work. And so that made me start to build an email list and just try to bring those people into a place where I can directly contact you and tell you about the projects and the work, because social media it's finicky. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Anything else? Yes.
What drew you to doing murals and using painting as a medium as opposed to other things?
What drew me to doing murals and using painting, like acrylic painting as a medium instead of these other mediums. So acrylic painting, I am an impatient person, and I really like the fact that acrylic paint dries very quickly. And so, it's harder because it's harder to do, obviously, shading, and you have to add different elements to make sure it doesn't dry as quickly if you're trying to do different things. But I really enjoy just the quickness of acrylic painting and how fast it dries, and how I can just kind of be working on just multiple paintings, kind of have multiple paintings coming in and out of the studio. I think acrylic painting, especially in the beginning when, maybe financially I was like, okay, I can't really purchase all of these maybe super expensive oil paints. Oil painting also requires a lot of other mediums and turpentine, just all these other things. Also requires a really well-ventilated studio so that you are not poisoning yourself. And I have had separate studios, and I have also worked from home and had studios in my home, separate rooms. And so I think what I have kind of found is that acrylic painting, it just really worked with the fact that I like having a studio in my home. And I just like the quickness of it. And for my artwork, it has just seemed to really work out. And then in terms of why mural work, I just love the scale of murals. It's incredible to see a tiny picture that you draw and then just see it large scale. And when I was kind of shadowing other muralists and everything, it's just I don't know, I just really love that you're out there painting, people are coming up to you, they're asking you questions, they're talking to you. You see that other people kind of get inspired by it, seeing you paint, seeing you painting something. And I also just, I think in all the neighborhoods in Chicago that I've lived in, the murals are always what makes those neighborhoods really special. And it makes it feel, I don't know, more at home. And so I was I really want to kind of put my mark on the city in that way. And that's why I was I need to figure out how to do this. So, yes.
I feel for freelancing or owning your own business, there can be a lot of trial and
Okay, so what would I share for people who are starting their own business, since there is a lot of trial and error? I guess there's a lot of things that I would share. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of things that you just never think about, and you're also like, why didn't my school not teach me that? But okay, one of the this is like, I feel like so, it's like, oh, that's so boring, but it's so important, is like the taxes, how to do your taxes as a small business owner. Oh my God, I was like, YouTube, how do I do my taxes? Business owner, like this is so difficult, and keeping track of I'm like, what programs do I use? And this is also why it's so crucial to business owners and questions that we're all, what programs are you using? So, in the beginning it was like, oh, I just have like a spreadsheet, right? And I'm like trying to do things myself, TurboTax, all that. And then eventually other people are like, get this program, try this, try that, try QuickBooks and all that. So I think those things, as dull as they are, like as a small business owner, you need, those are the administrative things that are just really important to know. The other thing, I think, and I feel like I've kind of said this, is like you need a community of people that are in the same boat as you, because that's how you learn things. Obviously, we have the internet, which is fantastic, but it's so different when you can call up a friend, text someone, and be like, what does this mean? I mean, like reading contracts. I'm in that boat kind of right now, me and another artist talking about this contract that we're reading for a mural. And you're like, oh my God, I don't even know what does this mean, or what do you think about this? Does this seem right? Should we say no to this? Contract reading, all that, that's very important. And I think overall, I would say find people that are in the same boat as you. Find people that are ahead, that are like better, that are further in their career, and who can kind of mentor you. And because that makes all the difference. And that's how you're going to come out with all these like questions and all these things that you're like, oh my gosh, I just never really thought about that in terms of business. I just thought I was going to be like painting all day. And then it's like, no, like 50% of it is a lot of the administrative work. And like I said, artists, like, it's all about really recommendations. We're all recommending each other for projects. We're all recommending, hey, I have a series of paintings and I need someone to photograph them. Who do I contact? Like, I'm not gonna Google it. I'm gonna ask like my community, and people are gonna say, this person, this person, this person, right? And so, so that community, it's just vital. And that's how all that information, kind of gets shared. So. Anything else? Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.